our next speaker kind of needs no introduction, but I'll give it a half second anyway. If his picture's up, it'll be flash up there in a second. So Yalmaz, as we said, was one of the keynote speakers to 25,000 people that were just in Philadelphia in November. He's the Senior Director of Environmental Strategy at Office Depot. His internal role, as the bio says, is to initiate, integrate, and communicate environmental programs that are implemented by Office Depot globally, not just locally, not just nationally, but globally. He's also the co-chair of a group that's talking about sustainable purchasing. So how can one buy, as an individual, as a company, as a region, sustainable products, and to be able to track and monitor and measure and verify results. So again, it's our honor and pleasure to welcome Yalmaz Siddiqui, international rock star.
That pressure, Brad. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. And thanks also to Ajay for being the first brown guy with a blue suit and a blue tie to kick off the morning. And if you see us later and can't distinguish us, he has an excess of hair and I have a lack, as you can tell. How many of you were at Greenbuild? Show of hands. The vast majority. Okay. Well, the astute among you, this side of the room, may have noticed that the title that Brad mentioned and the title that's up there is a little bit different. And at Greenbuild, my title at Office Depot was Senior Director of Environmental Strategy. And in the ensuing couple of months, I've expanded my role to include the notion of supplier diversity. And that addition has caused me to step back and ask, this notion of sustainability that we've been advocating, or we are advocating as a movement, have we, as an environmental community, hijacked the term? Have we taken what is a wider notion, sustainability, and really started talking about it as if it's environmental sustainability? And I've concluded in the last 3 months of exploring the term and the definition through its history and its evolution that we have. With all due respect to the conference organizers, the title of this conference is Tristate Sustainability Symposium. I'd say the more accurate title is Tristate's Environmental Sustainability Symposium. And what I'd like to do over the next 15-20 minutes is use the notion of purchasing, the act of buying something, to hopefully widen your perspective on what you're trying to do as a sustainability practitioner. And we'll do this with a search through history, as I mentioned. Okay, so first question, what does this term mean? We talk about it almost every day, but will someone from the floor take a go and define it? What does sustainable mean? Anyone? Ongoing, okay, very good. Anyone else?
Improvement.
Improvement, okay, ongoing improvement, yes? Capacity to endure, very good. Okay, well, the online etymology dictionary, the dictionary that takes you through the history of terms, said that in 1610, this notion of sustainable, the definition of it was bearable. Now, some people who we try and push too hard might think we're unbearable as advocates, but that was the term in 1610. By 1845, the term had evolved in its definition to become defensible. Something was sustainable if it was defensible. And then, towards 1800s, it evolved further into the notion that was discussed here about endurance and ability to be continued. And this is really the backdrop under which this lady, backdrop under which the modern day definition, or modern day work on sustainability began around sustainable development and sustainability and the functions that you might follow. And in moving forward, I want to take you through an exploration of the term sustainability, thinking at three levels: scale, large to small; dimension, in terms of different types of thinking; and degrees, meaning how much, scale or level. And I'll close with three calls to action. So let's start with scales of sustainable and a short history of the idea. Who's this? Head of the World Bank? No? Correct. This lady is Gro Harlem Brundtland. She is the Prime Minister. She was the Prime Minister of Norway and the chair of the United Nations World Commission on Environment Development. 1987, they published a book called Our Common Future, in which, for the first time, this definition of sustainability that you probably know, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations, first was articulated. 1987, Our Common Future. Good book. Now, Brundtland defined sustainability really for the economy, or for the country level. Meaning she was trying to advocate to prime ministers and ministers that you should think about the economic development of your countries by balancing future and current needs. So the scale that she was talking at in the Our Common Future book was the scale of the country and the globe. Who's this? And you can't answer. This is the problem with being an author. No one sees you. This is John Elkington. And John Elkington's second major book in 1997 was called Cannibals with Forks. And you might not realize this, but for the first time, the first time someone introduced the notion of the triple bottom line was in this book, Cannibals with Forks, 1997. And basically Elkington said that the sustainable business of the 21st century will be one that looks beyond profit and also thinks about people and planet. Triple bottom line. Now, so Elkington defined sustainable really at the level of the company, not the country level, which was Brundtland. He defined it at the level of the company or the enterprise. Now, but back in 1988, just after the World Commission on Environment Development wrote their Our Common Future book that really started us on this modern-day sustainability movement, Elkington had written this book, which was the Green Consumer Guide, and it sold millions, and it basically started the green consumer movement in America, England, and to many degrees, to much extent, the world. And it was very, very popular, far more popular than Cannibals with Forks. Maybe it's something to do with the title. Cannibals with Forks is not a particularly good title for a book. But I would say that perhaps that history of the World Commission on Environment Development writing Our Common Future, talking about the broader notion of needs and future and multiple, wide notion, and the success of this book caused us and the community around sustainability it really led to sustainability being defined as green. These two things became more connected in the consciousness of people than the wider notion that Elkington was trying to advocate in Cannibals with Forks, and Brundtland was trying to advocate in the Our Common Future, wider notion. So I've sort of talked a little bit about the wider notion, but I've also talked about scales. Country, company, product, which is the Green Consumer Guide. What is a green product? So now I'm going to talk about these dimensions more exactly. And when we think about sustainability, what color do we think of? We think about green. And green, or environmental sustainability and environmental sustainable purchasing, benefits the planet and enables some protection of the planet. But what about these other two boxes? What about economically sustainable purchasing? And what about socially sustainable purchasing? What are these things? And And in the exploration since this transition of title, where the wider notion became much more important for me to think about, started thinking about the act of purchasing and what makes the act of purchasing sustainable. From an economic standpoint, economic sustainable purchasing could be purchasing that saves money immediately or over time, or mitigates risks, and what's missing here is somehow enables competition and prosperity for the economy. And to illustrate the first notion, saving money immediately, you pay more for something, it's maybe less sustainable than if you pay less for something. This is over time. If you pay more for something up front, but then it saves you money over time, that's also more economically sustainable because long term you're saving money as an organization. And then if you have risks in your supply chain, if you're paying less for something that's riskier from a resource standpoint or a social standpoint, that's actually not economically sustainable because you'll be faced with risks as an organization that you might not be able to sustain. So that's a summary maybe of economically sustainable actions or economically sustainable purchasing. From a social standpoint, there's three notions, I think, below social sustainability. One is around human rights and worker rights. And this is really often in the global supply chain, so international sourcing, where that becomes more of an issue. Then there's the notion of hub, or historically underutilized businesses. That's a national notion in America or in countries about including your previously or your underprivileged communities, whether they're minorities or women or disabled people. And then finally, social sustainable purchasing could be purchasing that supports causes like breast cancer or medical research. To further unpack those, to pursue socially sustainable purchasing means you avoid issues such as human rights violations, you avoid issues like conflict minerals, you avoid issues in terms of human rights and poor, low wages in communities you're buying from. In terms of hub, this is one thing that's really been a very interesting exploration. There is a whole world over here that thinks about inclusion, economic inclusion and social inclusion in America. And there are certifications, just like there's eco-labels in the green world, there are certifications for, NMSCC is National Minority Supplier Development Council. They define what constitutes a minority supplier. The WeBank defines what constitutes a woman's-owned business. It sounds easy, but it's not always, because people who know this system game it by having a guy really run the company, and they put their wife as the chief executive. So you need certifications to prove that indeed, when you're saying you're a woman's own business, you are a woman's own business. And NGLCC stands for Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce. SD is Service Disabled Veteran. NIB is National Institutes of the Blind. There is this whole world of social sustainability advocates trying to push purchasing and trying to push organizations towards being more inclusive. And then finally solving issues like breast cancer, the pink products. So I've talked about this wider notion of economic sustainability, social sustainability, and this is now the area you all probably know very well, which is around resources, energy, and chemicals, in environmental protection, and trees or water, waste or pollution, energy and climate, chemicals and exposure. These are concepts you're very familiar with. So, in my view, the proper way to think about sustainability, and in the narrow frame, sustainable purchasing, is to say that when doing this type of purchasing, or when pursuing these types of actions, to be truly sustainable, we need to have thought about all three dimensions: economics, social and society, and the planet, when compared to ordinary purchasing. So that's the goal. And in transition now, 3 degrees of choice when considering one of these 3 dimensions. In terms of environment, we've historically been quite binary, and I'm going to illustrate that with this little thought experiment. Which of these 2 boxes is green? B. Fantastic. Normally I have prizes and I give them, but I have no prize, I'm sorry. B is correct. And the reason I put that question up there is because historically, in the mainstream in America, when people say green or environment sustainability, often their mind goes to this: dark green, Berkeley, hippie. And I think by asking this question, we might start accepting and start a different conversation. That when you pursue environmental sustainability, it's okay to not necessarily think you need to go to authentic over here. You can slowly move up the degrees or up the shades of green, and that's acceptable. And that, by the way, is a very powerful way to include more people in our movement by being more accepting of imperfection and shades. And just to illustrate, this is an example. So no recycled content paper, and then higher recycled content, and then most. It might be acceptable to go for the no recycled as part of your green journey if it's certified. There's a few examples, but the basic notion is that in terms of degrees, green can be subdivided into high environmental footprint and then less and less. And let's use the same frame to think about social sustainability. Non-social sustainability may result in exploitation of people. If you're making purchases that exploit people in the supply chain, that would be not socially sustainable. Doesn't enable inclusion. So if you're putting all your organization's dollars to a few organizations that are already doing pretty well, you're not being socially inclusive, and you're not being socially sustainable, I would argue. And if you're spending all your money and you're not advancing some cause or helping us solve societal problems, then also I'd say you're being less socially sustainable than you could be. And then it's not necessarily degrees, it's just different types of social sustainability that you could be pursuing. You could be helping support human rights advances. You could help support causes. You could support historically underutilized businesses and help the economically disadvantaged, of whom there are many in this economic context. You could be helping them out of their economic difficulties or social difficulties. And then finally, you'd be less economically sustainable if you were wasting money, if you weren't encouraging competition in the way you spend, and you were increasing your risks or ignoring quality. And you'd be more economically sustainable in your purchasing and your actions if you thought about saving money immediately over time, if you thought about managing risks in your supply chain, being aware of what those risks might be, and if you supported competition. So the ultimate goal, I think, of a wider perspective in terms of sustainable purchasing would be to pursue purchasing that optimizes all 3 of these dimensions. Optimizes economics, social, and environment sustainability. And you can break it down into lots of different sub-dimensions in the Venn diagram if you want. The goal could be to save money while driving increased green spend and increased socially sustainable or inclusive spend. We're thinking about how to document or quantify this right now, but this is a thought experiment in some way. We're not quite here yet. So towards a definition, I said we'd try and get us towards a definition. Sustainable purchasing is not green purchasing. Sustainable purchasing, we would articulate as a working definition, is purchasing that can be continued over the long term, per this endurance notion. And it's really a never-ending journey to optimize economic, social, and environmental benefits by acquiring certain products and services or working with certain suppliers of those products and services. And that's the main point I'd like to make. When you're thinking about sustainability and thinking about sustainable purchasing, think at a wider scale. To conclude, I want to ask three things. We've been on a journey as Office Depot, both as an environmental leader, a social sustainability leader, really working on including historically underutilized businesses, and an economically sustainable leader in terms of saving money through our purchasing. But we've been on this journey for both environment and social sustainability primarily based on customers. So cities, states, federal government, who've been pushing us to think about these things. So if you're a customer of Office Depot's, please continue asking questions, please keep pushing us, and push your suppliers to think about these broader notions as they work with you. If you're not a customer, consider becoming one, and we want to help you on a greener purchasing journey and eventually a sustainable purchasing journey. And number three, in 2 months' time, we're going to have the annual meeting of the Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council in DC, and our analog is USGBC with the wider notion of sustainability. And this will be essentially like the first green build in many ways 20 years ago. It'll be the first time people who are interested in this notion of sustainable purchasing are coming together to talk about how to define, how to move this notion forward. So please come, purchasingcouncil.org, you can register for it. And I'm probably a little bit beyond my time, but thank you very much for your time, and thanks, Brad.